A ranch consumed by fire, a little girl's scream inside the flames, and the only one who dares to enter is a horse, smoke choking the night, a father pounding on burning doors, Shadow, the black Mustang, leaping through fire, a child pulled from the blaze by strength and courage, and the cost, scars carved deep, loyalty tested to the edge of death. Yet from ashes, life stirs again, a bond unbroken, a family reborn, and a town whispering the name of a hero. This is not just a story of survival, it is the leap of love through fire, and the shadow that carried them into the dawn. There are stories whispered in small towns that sound too wild to be true, tales of fire and ash, of love stronger than fear, of a black horse who did what no man dared. This is not only the story of a burning barn, it is the story of how loyalty lit the way through darkness. Stay with this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe in courage that changes everything, subscribe so you can journey with us into the heart of the fire. The prairie wind that night was no gentle breeze. It was a roaring beast tumbling across the flat land of Reed Ranch, rattling the weathered fences and making the pines sway like frightened dancers. Beyond the fence line, Silverton, a small frontier town tucked against the Colorado foothills, lay in uneasy silence. But here, on the edge of the ranch, the silence was shattered by the hiss of sparks carried on the gale. The barn stood tall in the dark, timbers old, roof patched with tin, a place that smelled of hay, sweat, and leather. Normally, it was a safe haven. Tonight, it glowed red at the seams. Smoke writhed out of its cracks, twisting skyward like black serpents. The air tasted of cinders, sharp and metallic, coating the tongue with dread. Horses inside screamed and thrashed against their stalls, and in the middle of the storm, one stall held a shadow darker than the night itself. Ethan Reed was 36, but firelight carved deeper lines into his face, making him look older, wearier than his years. Tall and broad-shouldered, with arms roped in muscle from years of ranch work, he was a man molded by the land itself. His beard was coarse, peppered with early gray, his storm-gray eyes hard as flint, but shadowed with grief. The grief of a widower who had buried his wife 2 winters ago, and since then had spoken less, laughed almost never, and carried a silence heavy enough to bend his back. He wore a weather-beaten brown duster that snapped in the wind, jeans smeared with dust, and boots that had trampled miles of prairie. His hat had fallen when he sprinted across the yard. Now his hair clung damp with sweat as he staggered toward the burning barn. Behind him, a small voice cut through the roar of the fire. "Papa!" Anna Reed was only 7. Her blonde hair, normally braided, hung loose and tangled, catching sparks like threads of gold. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes wide and glistening. She clutched a ragged doll in one hand, barefoot in the cold earth, trembling but unwilling to leave her father's side. She was his last tether to life, his reason to keep moving when sorrow had almost swallowed him whole. It happened in a flash, a sound, a cry, almost too soft against the roar of the blaze. A whimper, not human. Anna froze. Then her eyes darted to the corner of the barn where a small shadow writhed. "Papa, Toby's inside," she cried. Toby, the runt of a shepherd pup, her only true companion since her mother's passing, was trapped. Before Ethan could grab her, Anna broke away, racing toward the barn doors. "Anna, no!" Ethan bellowed, but his words were swallowed by the wind and flame. She slipped through a gap in the heavy doors before he could reach her. He threw his shoulder against the timber, but the heat forced him back. The fire was a wall, alive, hissing and snarling. He pounded on the door with his fists, the skin blistering, the smoke clawing at his lungs. Inside, his daughter's voice faded into coughs. And then, silence. "Anna!" His scream ripped the night open. He stumbled back, helpless, choking. His mind reeled, searching for a way, any way to break through. But every path was blocked by fire. In the chaos, one figure had not moved. In the far stall, blacker than the smoke, Shadow stood. The Mustang was unlike the other horses, tall, rippling with untamed power, his coat shining obsidian when not marred by flame. His mane whipped as though it carried the storm itself. Shadow had been difficult, half wild, never fully broken, and Ethan had often doubted if he could ever trust the beast. But now, through the haze, Shadow's dark eyes locked with Ethan's, steady, unyielding. Ethan's fists lowered, his voice cracked. "Please, bring her back." It was not a command, it was a plea, a prayer whispered to an animal who seemed to understand more than men. Shadow pawed the earth, muscles bunching. Then, with a scream of fury that belonged more to legend than to flesh, the Mustang hurled his weight against the stall door. The wood shattered, fire wrapped around him like a crown as he plunged straight into the inferno. Ethan staggered backward, the night blurring in smoke and tears. For the first time since his wife's death, he was powerless, broken to his knees, forced to hope in something beyond himself. His daughter's silhouette flickered once against the flames, then vanished. Ethan's roar carried into the night as the barn collapsed inward, sparks showering the sky. Somewhere inside that burning maze, his little girl and the black Mustang were swallowed whole. The barn roared shut behind them. Anna's silhouette vanished in fire, and Ethan's scream still echoed in the wind. Shadow plunged into the inferno. The stall doors splintered beneath his weight, shards of wood scattering under flaming rafters. Heat struck him like a hammer, searing his black coat, singeing his mane. Yet the Mustang's stride never faltered. His hooves slammed against the straw-strewn floor, sparks leaping beneath each step. Inside, the air was alive with smoke, choking and twisting, thick enough to blind. Horses shrieked, the sound muffled by flame and timber. But Shadow's eyes cut through the haze. They found her, Anna, small and fragile, crumpled near a fallen beam. Her hair clung damp with soot, chest barely rising. The ragged doll she had carried slipped from her fingers into the ash. Shadow lunged. His teeth caught the edge of her cotton nightdress. He tugged, sharp and desperate. Her body jolted, limp as if she were already gone. For a heartbeat, Shadow hesitated. Her arms did not flail. Her voice did not cry. The smoke had stolen her breath. The Mustang pawed the ground, snorting against the sting in his lungs, then bit harder, dragging her across the dirt. Ash swirled, clinging to her pale skin, making her look more ghost than child. Outside, Ethan's fists battered the door, his voice muffled by crackling beams. "Anna!" "Hold on." His storm-gray eyes scanned through the cracks, and for the briefest instant he caught the shimmer of Shadow's gaze cutting through the darkness. Above them, the barn groaned. Flames licked greedily along the rafters. A shower of embers fell, hissing as they met the floor. The old timber, soaked with years of dust and oil, surrendered with a moan. One heavy plank split from the roof and crashed behind them, sealing the path they had entered. Fire roared up the barrier, a wall of flame so fierce it glowed white. Shadow reared back, neighing in fury, Anna's dress clenched between his teeth. There was no going back. The barn's frame trembled, each beam ready to collapse. Smoke pressed downward, thickening, pressing like a giant's hand. Through the haze, Shadow glimpsed a gap, small, jagged, carved by the fire itself. A section of wall had been eaten away, leaving an opening no wider than a doorway. Beyond it flickered the night air, cold and dark compared to the furnace within. But the gap was narrowing. Each second, flames curled inward, threatening to close the escape forever. Shadow's muscles bunched, his hooves dug deep. He yanked Anna forward, dragging her limp form closer to salvation. Every step was a battle, the weight of her small body pulling against him, the smoke clawing at his lungs, the fire slashing at his skin. Ethan stumbled around the barn's side, coughing, eyes watering. His voice cracked with every cry. "Anna!" He circled, searching for any breach, any break in the inferno. His boots slipped in the mud, but his body moved with the frantic energy of a father on the edge of losing everything. And then he saw it. Through a jagged tear in the barn's side, he caught a glimpse. Two eyes, bright as molten amber, piercing the smoke. Shadow's gaze, unwavering, holding steady even as flames curled against his skin. Ethan's heart pounded. He reached out, stretching his arm through the gap, though the heat scorched his skin raw. "Bring her! Please bring her!" Inside, the barn gave its final cry. The roof beams cracked, showering sparks. The air quaked as timber above split and sagged. Shadow lunged. His body shielded Anna, every muscle straining against gravity's pull. His coat burned in patches, skin blistered where fire licked, but he pressed forward, closer and closer to the gap. Anna stirred faintly, just the smallest flutter of her fingers against the dirt. Shadow pulled harder, and then came the deafening crack. The roof tilted. Splinters shot across the room. With a thunderous crash, half the barn caved in behind them, flames surging forward as though determined to swallow them both. Ethan pressed himself against the gap, shouting through the roar, "Shadow!" The Mustang gathered himself. He lowered his head, mane scorched, eyes burning with firelight. For a breath, his gaze locked with Ethan's, a look fierce, unyielding, alive, and then he plunged forward into the wall of smoke. The night consumed them, Anna's small form trailing in his teeth. Ethan saw only that flash of molten eyes, gleaming against the black. Then both child and horse were swallowed whole by the darkness. The night swallowed them whole. Ethan's last sight was Shadow's blazing eyes cutting through smoke, and then nothing but fire collapsing inward. And yet, through that storm, a sound split the chaos. With a shudder of hooves and a cry that drowned out the barn's death rattle, Shadow hurled his weight forward. Glass shattered as his body exploded through the narrow window, shards flashing in the firelight like falling stars. Ethan lunged instinctively. His arms caught Anna as she tumbled into his chest, limp and coated in soot. Her face pressed against him, soft and fragile, and he felt the faintest stir of breath. Relief tore a cry from his throat, ragged, almost a sob. He clutched her against his heart, shielding her from sparks raining down. But the moment of salvation came with terror. Behind her, Shadow's massive body twisted midair. Flames licked his flanks, his mane already scorched, his hooves colliding with splintered wood as he crashed through the frame. For one harrowing heartbeat, Ethan believed the horse would not survive the landing. Shadow struck the ground with brutal force. His forelegs buckled. The impact thundered across the yard, shaking the earth like a hammer blow. Ethan's breath caught. His mind screamed that no animal could withstand such violence. That Shadow had sacrificed himself for Anna, and now lay broken on the dirt. "God, no!" Ethan whispered, clutching his daughter tighter, his throat closing with grief. For the briefest instant, he saw the story ending in tragedy. His daughter saved, but the black Mustang silenced forever in the embers of loyalty. But Shadow moved. A trembling groan rumbled from deep in his chest as his hind legs scrabbled against the earth. His body writhed, half collapsed, but alive. Alive, though broken by the fire's touch. Ethan laid Anna gently on the ground, brushing ash from her lips. Her eyes fluttered, faint, not yet waking. His heart urged him to run, to flee with her to safety, but his soul chained him to the fallen horse that had carried her from death. Shadow lay sprawled, muscles quivering. His once glossy coat was marred with angry burns, patches where flesh was raw and smoking. The long black mane, proud and wild, was seared in jagged clumps. His foreleg bent at an angle wrong for nature, trembling with every effort to rise. Ethan crawled toward him, one hand pressed to the scorched hide. Heat radiated from the animal's body, but beneath it pulsed the hammering of a heart still refusing to quit. "Easy, boy, easy." His voice cracked, the words nothing more than a plea. Shadow's amber eyes rolled toward him. They were clouded with pain, but they still burned with that same unyielding will Ethan had seen in the fire. Behind them, the barn surrendered at last. Its roof caved with a scream of splintering wood, flames shooting into the night sky. Sparks soared like a storm of fireflies, lighting the prairie in ghastly orange. The sound carried across the fields, reaching even the silent houses of distant Silverton. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere else, bells rang as neighbors rushed to their windows. But here, on Reed Ranch, there was only Ethan, his daughter, and the wounded Mustang, who had given everything. Shadow heaved once more, forcing his body upright for a fraction of a second. His muscles locked, his chest strained against the agony. Then, with a strangled cry, he collapsed onto his side, earth shaking beneath his weight. His legs folded awkwardly, his head falling heavily into the dirt. Ethan's hand flew to the horse's muzzle. Breath still came, shallow, ragged, but the body was failing. Burns marked every limb. Blood seeped from gashes hidden beneath the scorched coat. The fire had left its mark, cruel and merciless. Ethan's heart broke open. For years he had sealed it behind silence, behind grief for his wife. But now, faced with this creature's sacrifice, the dam within him cracked. Ethan gathered Anna in one arm, and with the other wrapped himself against Shadow's heaving chest. His tears streaked soot down his face, dripping onto the blackened coat. "Don't you leave us," he whispered, voice quivering. "Don't you dare leave us. Don't leave me." The night seemed to pause. The flames hissed, the embers danced, but in that circle of grief, man and child and horse clung together against the weight of loss. For the first time in years, Ethan Reed wept, not as a rancher, not as a widower, but as a father on his knees, begging a dying Mustang not to abandon the only family he had left. The Mustang's eye flickered once, dim against the dark. Then it closed. Shadow's eyes had closed. Ethan's tears fell into the scorched mane as he begged, "Don't leave us." But the night was not finished testing them. Ethan forced himself to move. His arms tightened around Anna, still faint but alive, while his other hand braced against Shadow's unmoving body. "Hold on, boy," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "Just hold on." Across the yard, neighbors shouted in the distance, alarmed by the inferno's collapse. But Ethan did not wait. He heaved, pulling at Shadow's halter, dragging with all the strength grief and desperation could lend. The Mustang groaned, a sound heavy as thunder, and shifted one foreleg forward. That was enough. Together, man and horse staggered toward the wagon at the edge of the yard. The fire behind them hissed like an enemy cheated of its prey. Ethan laid Anna across the wagon's seat, wrapping his duster around her shoulders. Her lips parted in shallow breaths, lashes trembling against her soot-smudged cheeks. He brushed the hair from her forehead, his hand shaking. Then he turned to Shadow. The Mustang's body was slick with sweat and ash. Burned patches marred his hide, and one leg dragged uselessly. Yet, when Ethan placed a hand on his neck, the horse raised his head, eyes dull but burning with a stubborn spark. "You're coming with us," Ethan said, voice hoarse but certain. "We don't leave family behind." The wagon wheels groaned as Ethan whipped the reins, driving toward town. Silverton slept under a pale moon, unaware of the battle waged on the Reed Ranch. The streets were silent, but for the clatter of hooves and the rattle of wheels. The lantern over the small clinic still burned. Ethan pulled hard on the reins, the wagon lurching to a halt. He leapt down, scooping Anna into his arms. His boots hammered against the porch as he shouted, "Miriam! Open up! It's Ethan!" Moments later, the door flung wide. Dr. Miriam Hart stood framed in the light. 45 years old, her figure was tall and commanding, though softened by a quiet weariness of long nights and too many battles against time. Her hair, once chestnut, was streaked with silver, pulled into a low braid that hung over a plain linen blouse smudged from earlier work. Sharp hazel eyes flicked from Ethan to Anna, then to the shadow of the Mustang stumbling in the wagon traces. Her voice carried both steel and sympathy. "Bring them in." Quickly the clinic smelled of iodine, hay, and lamp oil. Ethan laid Anna on a cot while Miriam knelt beside Shadow. Her practiced hands ran over scorched hide, pressing gently at burns, tracing the bent foreleg, feeling for pulse and breath. "Smoke inhalation," she muttered. "Severe burns. He's lost a dangerous amount of strength." She looked up, eyes grave. "Ethan, I won't lie, he may not survive the night." The words struck harder than the fire itself. Ethan's jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. Anna stirred at that moment, coughing softly. Her small voice cracked. "Papa, Shadow." Ethan brushed her hair back, whispering, "He's here. He's fighting." But the truth weighed heavy. Miriam's warning was clear. Shadow balanced on the edge of life and death. Anna pushed herself upright despite Ethan's protest. Her cheeks were pale, eyes wide with tears. She staggered to Shadow's side, laying a trembling hand on his muzzle. "Don't you leave us," she whispered. "Please, Shadow. If you live, I'll take care of you forever. You'll be part of our family." I promise. Her words were too big for her small body, but they carried the weight of innocence and truth. She pressed her forehead against the horses, whispering vows only a child could make without hesitation. Ethan's throat tightened. For so long he had kept Anna from promises. Life had taught him how easily they broke. But here she was, offering hers freely, believing it could anchor the wounded Mustang to this world. Miriam straightened, wiping soot from her hands. Her eyes softened at the sight of the child and the horse, but her tone remained steady, professional. "We'll do everything we can. But the truth is simple. This night will decide everything. If he makes it to dawn, he has a chance. If not..." She let the rest hang in the air. Ethan lowered himself to the cot beside Anna. He took her hand gently in his, rough calluses brushing against her soft skin. Their eyes met, hers full of hope, his clouded with fear. Across from them, Shadow lay silent but breathing, chest rising and falling with the shallow rhythm of battle. The lantern's flame flickered as Miriam drew the shutters tight against the cold wind. Shadows stretched long across the walls, wrapping the room in uneasy silence. Ethan's hand tightened around Anna's as he turned back to Miriam. She stood in the doorway, her voice low, carrying the final truth of the night. "Tonight we'll decide it all." Ethan bowed his head, saying nothing. For once, silence spoke louder than any vow. "Tonight we'll decide it all." Dr. Miriam Hart's words still lingered in the air when silence fell heavy over the clinic. Ethan sat beside Anna, his hand wrapped around hers, his eyes fixed on the rise and fall of Shadow's chest. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, as if the night itself held its breath. The hours stretched thin. Outside, the wind rattled against the shutters, but inside, the only sounds were the rasp of Shadow's breathing and the occasional crackle of the oil lamp. Anna refused to sleep. Wrapped in her father's coat, her hair tangled and smoky, she sat cross-legged beside Shadow's head, humming a lullaby. Her voice was faint, almost trembling, but it wove through the silence with a fragile strength. The melody was one her mother used to sing, though Ethan had not heard it in years. Each note seemed to anchor the horse to this world, tethering him through the haze of pain. Ethan watched her. His daughter's pale face glowed softly in the lamplight. Her lips cracked from smoke, yet her eyes shone with fierce determination. He had thought her too young to carry burdens, but here she was, holding vigil like a guardian. Ethan knelt at Shadow's side. His rough hands, scarred from years of ranch work, trembled as they brushed against the horse's scorched coat. He bowed his head. "I've asked for little in my life," he whispered, words catching in his throat. "I wasn't there when he dared not say his wife's name aloud, needed me. Don't take him from us, too." It was not a prayer of practiced faith. It was raw, desperate, born of loss and the terror of losing more. The room had been still for so long that when Shadow's body twitched, all three of them jolted. His legs shifted, hooves scraping weakly against the wooden floor. His nostrils flared, drawing in a sharp, ragged breath. Anna gasped, her small hands pressing against his muzzle. "Papa, he's waking!" Shadow's eyelids fluttered. For a moment, only whites showed, clouded with exhaustion. Then slowly, heavily, they opened, revealing the amber glow dulled but not extinguished. He blinked once, twice, before his gaze steadied on Anna. The girl's laughter cracked into a sob. She leaned closer, whispering, "You're still here. I knew you wouldn't leave us." Shadow snorted weakly, his chest rising more firmly with each breath. His legs trembled, pushing against the ground as if to prove there was still strength left. His body shook, but he fought upward, staggering halfway before collapsing back down. Dr. Hart crouched beside him, her professional mask slipping for a heartbeat into awe. That fight in him, it's rare. He's not ready to give up. Ethan rose slowly, watching the horse struggle. Something about the way Shadow pushed through pain stirred a memory he had locked away. His wife's voice echoed faintly, carried by the memory of a summer years ago. "He's not just any Mustang. There's a wildness in him, but also a heart. Give him time, Ethan. You'll see." He remembered her bringing home a young, half-starved Mustang with tangled mane and wary eyes. She had tended to him with patience Ethan never understood, whispering to him as though the horse carried secrets worth protecting. Ethan had dismissed it back then, too wild, too unpredictable, but she had loved the creature, believed in him. His chest tightened as realization hit him like a blow. This was the same horse. Shadow was the Mustang his wife had once saved, the one she had cherished. The truth flooded him with both sorrow and wonder. His wife had seen something he had refused to, and now, years later, in the fire's aftermath, the Mustang had returned to save the daughter they once held together. Ethan's knees buckled, and he sank onto the floor beside Shadow. He reached for the horse's face, pressing his forehead against the coarse, burned mane. His voice was a broken whisper. "It was you. She saved you once, and now you've saved us." The connection bound past to present, love to loyalty. For Ethan, it felt like a message sent across the years. Anna looked up at her father, sensing the gravity though not fully understanding. "Mama knew him?" she asked softly, her small voice breaking the quiet. Ethan nodded, tears streaking clean lines through the soot on his cheeks. Yes, sweetheart. She loved him. Maybe. Maybe this was her way of keeping watch over us. Anna pressed her cheek against Shadow's neck, her tiny arms hugging as much of him as she could. Then we can't let him go. Not now. Miriam placed a steadying hand on Ethan's shoulder, her hazel eyes softened. He still has a chance. But he'll need more than medicine. He'll need you both. Ethan lifted his gaze toward the rafters of the clinic, where shadows danced with lamplight. His eyes burned with unshed tears, but his voice carried a fragile strength. Maybe. This is the reason you left him with us, he whispered into the silence as if speaking to his wife. Maybe this is why you left us behind. Shadow exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between pain and defiance, as though echoing the words. Ethan's chest tightened, caught between grief and hope. The night pressed in closer, heavy with unanswered questions, as if all of Silverton waited for dawn. Maybe this is why you left us behind. Ethan's whisper still lingered in the darkened clinic, heavy with grief and fragile hope. Shadow's shallow breath echoed in the silence, tethering them all to the thin thread of dawn. Hours bled into one another until the night's hold began to loosen. The storm wind eased, and a pale glow crept along the horizon. Ethan sat slumped on the wooden floor, Anna curled against his side, her small hand resting on Shadow's muzzle. Dr. Miriam Hart dozed in a chair, chin on her chest, but her hands never strayed far from her medical kit. The first shaft of sunlight pierced through the shutters. It touched the Mustang's coat, blackened, scarred, but still breathing. Shadow stirred, eyelids fluttering open against the dawn. His gaze, though weary, carried a quiet defiance. Anna bolted upright, her face lighting with wonder. Papa, he's still here. Ethan's throat closed, and he could only nod. For the first time in years, tears he shed were not only of loss, but of gratitude. By mid-morning, word had spread. The fire on Reed Ranch had painted the sky in smoke, and neighbors came, drawn by worry and whispers. Wagons lined the dusty street outside the clinic. Men with soot-streaked faces, women carrying blankets, children clutching their parents' hands, all gathered, hushed, as though waiting to see a verdict. When Miriam stepped out to speak, her shoulders straightened with the authority of years in service. The barn is gone, but the child lives, and the Mustang fights still. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One old ranch hand muttered, "A horse went through fire for them?" Others shook their heads in disbelief, yet admiration filled their voices, and a new name began to pass from mouth to mouth. The hero horse inside. Shadow shifted again. His burns were raw, but strength had begun to return. He braced his front legs, trembled, then pushed upward. The sound of his hooves striking the floorboards was like thunder announcing a storm's end. Anna clapped her hands in delight. "He's standing, Papa!" "He's really standing." Ethan rose quickly, steadying the horse's shoulder, though Shadow leaned on no one. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, as if to remind them all that he was no victim. He was a survivor. For Ethan, the sight was more than relief. It was redemption. His wife's faith in the Mustang had not been misplaced. Shadow had carried it forward into this night, and now into the dawn. That afternoon, the schoolhouse bell rang, and Silverton's children streamed out, clutching papers and crayons. They had heard the story whispered through town, and their young hands drew what words could not capture: horses leaping through fire, a little girl held safe, a father kneeling in ash. By evening, they pinned the drawings to the walls of the clinic, turning it into a gallery of survival. One sketch bore a title in shaky letters: "The Horse Who Carried." Hope Anna's eyes filled with tears as she traced the crayon lines. She pressed the picture into Shadow's stall, whispering, "See? Everyone knows you're a hero now." Ethan stepped outside, the golden light of sunset warming his weathered face. Neighbors surrounded him, their eyes no longer seeing a man hardened by loss, but one softened by courage and grief transformed. For years he had spoken little, carrying silence like a shield. But as he looked over the gathered crowd, and then back through the window where Shadow stood beside his daughter, words finally came. "My wife once believed this horse had a purpose," he said quietly, his voice rough but steady. "Last night, he proved her right. He didn't just save my child, he saved me." The crowd held still, the weight of his words pressing deep. Some removed their hats, others nodded silently, as though honoring not only the Mustang, but the family bound together by fire. As dusk deepened, Ethan returned inside. Anna curled in the straw, head resting against Shadow's scarred flank. The horse lowered his neck, eyes closing in peace, as though guarding her dreams. Ethan lowered himself beside them, resting one hand on his daughter's shoulder, the other against Shadow's neck. In that circle of warmth, loss no longer felt like an empty wound. It felt like a bridge, his wife's love carrying them forward. The next morning, dawn broke clean and bright. The prairie shimmered with dew, the ashes of the barn still smoking, but quiet. Ethan stepped outside with Anna at his side. Shadow followed, limping but upright, his scars catching the light like silver threads. The townsfolk stood waiting. As the first rays spilled across the land, Ethan lifted his daughter into his arms, Shadow pressing close beside them. Together, framed by the rising sun, they stood as one, man, child, and horse, bound by loyalty and love. The fire had taken much, but it had left them something greater, a new beginning. Sometimes the fiercest flames do not destroy, they reveal. Ethan learned that grief can harden a heart, but loyalty and love can break through the silence. Anna discovered that even the smallest voice can carry the weight of hope. And Shadow, scarred but unbroken, showed them all that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to carry others through it. From ashes, a family was remade, and from fire, trust was born again. If this story touched you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. And if you want more journeys of courage, family, and the bond between people and animals, subscribe so you'll never miss the next story waiting just beyond the horizon.